Hi everyone. So today we're just doing a quick reaction to a video from Mike the Vegan. A couple things to say before I begin. So first of all, he's reacting to an Alzheimer's study done by so-called vegan doctor, and I will say so-called when we get into the meat of this. His name is Dr. Dean Ornish, and I've written a blog post which goes into the same study in some detail. I'll link to that blog post down below. That's point number one. Um, Point number two is that this is a long video, so I may speed it up at times. I may cut, like I may sort of do some edits on it in post production. So forgive me for that. I'll put the link to the whole video for those who want to watch the whole video. It's too long to react to the whole thing, so I'm only going to react to certain segments.
Hey, it's Mike here, and today the results are in for a randomized control trial on people with Alzheimer's by Dr. Dean Ornish, and the study itself describes the diet as a whole food vegan diet, as well as some other lifestyle interventions. We'll parse those out, but I've been waiting for this one, and really quickly, this was one of the main reasons that I initially shifted toward a plant-based diet 14 years ago. I was very afraid of Alzheimer's because as a child, I lived with my grandma who had Alzheimer's. Now, this was a lady who was previously not violent. All of a sudden was like violent toward me. My mom saved me, and then she was put in a nursing home. So this one hits like pretty close to home, nursing or my actual home. No, so this was an important reason for me to shift. I'll talk about why, but it was mostly just theoretical reasons back then when I shifted, though they were pretty valid even then. So we're going to look at the study, we're going to look at the results, and look at one little aspect.
So I don't honestly know his story. I don't frankly care about his story. He's not an important enough person to care about. But, you know, it's worth noting that even at that stage, there was probably some good evidence that sugar was the problem when it came to Alzheimer's, not whatever he's going to say.
That annoys me a bit as a vegan, and we're also going to look at examples of people who have had this cognitive impairment and reverse it to a degree.
Did this help reverse some of the symptoms of Alzheimer's?
Yes.
So the anecdotes are fine, but they don't really tell us anything, right? So, I mean, we'll get into that. I guess when we get to that part of the video, we'll go a little bit deep.
Yes.
And that is one person that's in the study and one person that is not. Very interesting stuff. So let's just go. I don't want to spend too much time on background before I get into the results, but I feel like we need to cover just the key point here. And that is all the way back into like the early 1900s, Dr. Alzheimer, the one that discovered Alzheimer's disease, described atherosclerotic or sort of artery disease changes in the brains of these patients. And yes, I've shown you these images a bunch of times before. You can see the brain artery sections of people with Alzheimer's versus normal people. And yeah, Alzheimer's is clogged brain arteries. I have a whole video on that. So where does diet come in then? Well, we're talking about the cardiovascular system, and we have several studies showing improvements in that, whether it's people with heart disease or whatever, and that is likely due to perhaps the lowering of inflammation, but also just the improvement of artery function. And then of course,
so the lowering of inflammation, he sort of glossed over that, but that's what it is, right? It has nothing to do with cholesterol or whatever the hell he's talking about. Like, Alzheimer's is thought of in the literature as type 3 diabetes. And so if you want to reverse Alzheimer's, you should probably do the things that will reverse diabetes. By the way, going on a low-fat vegan diet could be one way to do that. I think it's a terrible way to do that, but it is effective because it minimizes the Randall cycle, which gets activated when you consume both fats and carbohydrates at the same time. So I'm not saying that there isn't, again, this is where the anecdotes sort of come up. Like, yeah, you'll find people who've been able to get success on a vegan approach, but that doesn't really mean anything, does it?
slowing the progression of the disease, and that is very likely due to the lower saturated fat and cholesterol.
No, it's not due to the lower saturated fat. We can tell you exactly what it's due to. It's due to the limited activation of the Randall cycle, which again means that you're not having fats and carbs at the same time if you go on a low-fat vegan diet.
Consumption, which of course results in that lower LDL or bad cholesterol we see in vegans, and high LDL.
Oh my God, this screen is ridiculous. It is from one of the most conflicted trials. It's not even a trial. It's a position statement from European Heart Journal. It's from 2017. It's basically like, it's for even if those people believed it at the time, the people who believed it at the time are idiots. I wouldn't listen to them. But even if they believed it at the time, it's 2017. A lot of things have changed. And yeah, this is complete nonsense what he's showing. It's like I say, it's one of the most conflicted studies I've ever seen. Maybe I'll put up their conflict of interest statement here. Takes a long time to read.
LDL is causally linked to atherosclerosis, the same thing that's happening in these Alzheimer's brains. Of course, there's a bit more going on as well there.
Causally linked to atherosclerosis. Like, what does that even mean, right? I could say that being alive is causally linked to atherosclerosis because dead people don't get it, right? I could say that being a human is causally linked to atherosclerosis because, I don't know, cows don't get it. So the wording that they're using is like completely meaningless.
But that's the main point. All right, getting to the main study, we're talking about this one here, which was published not that long ago before filming, but I have been preparing for this to come out. It's a randomized control trial in the Journal of Alzheimer's Research and Therapy. And this is one that I thought might have even been 5 years long, like Ornish's previous study on heart disease, because there was a woman interviewed on CNN who had been on this diet for 5 years. But it turns out that this study is just looking at out to 20 weeks or about 5 months, really not that long, which I think is kind of cool because if we can see any results at that time frame, then people will be more motivated to make changes and not think they have to do it for 5 years before seeing anything. And they're comparing this whole diet and lifestyle intervention to a control group. That control group is just standard Alzheimer's care. So they're people who are still getting some care. And the number of subjects.
So actually what that control group is, it's worse. If it was standard of care, it would be bad enough. So let me just point out the problems with the control group standard of care thing. So when you are giving people an intervention, you're giving people an intervention over and above their medications. And you can read the paper and you'll see that, right? So let's say I'm just talking on the phone for 20 minutes, right? In addition, let's say I'm making a diet change and I'm talking on the phone for 20 minutes with that person every week. What I would need to do in order to make a proper randomized controlled trial is take that placebo arm and give them the 20 minutes of phone consultation per week or whatever. I'm just picking a random. It's not that random because these guys did get a lot of phone consultations and regular consultations and a lot of other things. So the problem with the control group is it's not been well designed to isolate one variable. One group is getting, as he's going to go into, one group is getting exercise, stress support, supplements, and dietary interventions, and the other group is getting nothing. So it's not telling us much of anything. It's not telling us which of those many things or which combination of those things is actually making a difference.
They were aiming for 100 initially, but it turns out, they're recruiting during the pandemic and they ended up with 50 in the end. But, we'll see. They still have statistically significant results in many areas. And a key point here is that these aren't people who have super advanced dementia or Alzheimer's. These are people who have Alzheimer's that has led to mild cognitive impairment or dementia. And in particular, they have to be over a certain score on the mocha scale, which no is not you being rated on how well you drink a mocha latte. It's the Montreal Cognitive Assessment Test for dementia. Not as good tasting. And mild, well,
so let's stop it there for a second, because if I remember correctly, let's just actually bring up the paper. What I wanted to bring up was that if you look at the baseline characteristics, right? So this is the cognitive tests, and you actually see that the intervention group is a little bit healthier, right? So just talking about, let's ignore this borderline thing. So the control group has 3 less people. The intervention group has 3 more people in this borderline category. And if you add this all together, this comes to 19, and this comes to only 16, right? So comparing 19 people with mild to severe illness and as opposed to 16, I don't know. I mean, in such a small study, that could lead to some kind of bias. So just to point that out.
It sounds mild, and it's obviously not as bad as severe, is still very notable. Just to alzheimers.gov. Quote, signs of mild cognitive impairment include losing things often, forgetting to go to important events or appointments, and having more trouble coming up with words than other people of the same age. Now, everybody forgets things to a degree, but not like this. We're talking about worse than people your same age. And it could be the case that a lot of this mild cognitive impairment is driven by actual artery changes. Perhaps they're just more mild. They haven't fully taken over yet. Now, there's a lot more details that we can go through a bit later in this video, but I just want to hit on those.
So just the way he's talking means that he knows absolutely nothing about how Alzheimer's works, right? Because the kind of arterial damage that happens at very advanced stages of Alzheimer's. And in the initial stages of Alzheimer's, what we find is an inability to process energy, specifically glucose and so on, in the brain properly. And I can put some scans, I can bring some scans up and show this, which shows that for many of the early stages, the issue is not anything to do with the blood, it's to do with sugar processing related to insulin resistance. So I know he claims to be really concerned about Alzheimer's, he doesn't understand it at all.
results right now? Well, first of all, we have this chart, which is one of the stars of the shows here. We're looking at overall clinical dementia rating, which in the control group went up as expected in people with Alzheimer's. But the wild part, that plant-based diet group went down.
So they're not just doing a plant-based diet, they're doing many things. And, like I mentioned, the control group had more people. Depends on how this data was weighted. I haven't looked at it in huge detail, but this isn't super impressive. Let me put it that way. I've seen studies with other studies which show decline in Alzheimer's symptoms, and I will show some of those studies as we get further into this video.
That means their overall clinical dementia severity was decreasing, which is like blowing my mind. It should blow a lot of people's mind.
It shouldn't blow anyone's mind. So there are lots of interventions, some of which we're going to go into, which are known to decrease Alzheimer's severity. Okay.
People did not think that this was possible. Anyway, we have another chart here, which is the Alzheimer's cognition score, which followed the same trend, but wasn't statistically significant. And then we also...
So that's interesting. So just looking at this graph, this looks kind of similar to the previous one, which tells me, and this one didn't cross the bar for statistical significance, which tells me that the other one sort of just barely crossed that bar for statistical significance. Again, it's such a poorly designed trial that I would have expected this group getting so much support, getting, people to help with their exercise, people to help with stress management, getting all this kind of stuff. I would expect them to make progress regardless of what diet they're on. So it doesn't surprise me. But the fact that it's, even with all that stuff, it's just barely hitting statistical significance, that's interesting.
Score, which followed the same trend, but wasn't statistically significant. And then we also have a third chart here of clinical dementia progression, which continued in the control group, but stopped in that plant group. I'm just going to call them the plant group. And then we have something called the clinical global impression of change, which I think is just a bad name for it. But we're looking at somebody on a Zoom call, like a clinician, judging the dementia rates of these people blindly, as much as is possible, the study says, because, someone's going to get on there, and if they have mild dementia, they might just be like, and then I had to eat the vegan diet. All the carrots reminded me of my old boyfriend in the 40s. And they're like, oh crap, I know what...
Such a chump, man. All right.
Which one they were. And I had to go ahead and just make a chart for this, and we can ask, what is the number of people that improved in this perceived overall dementia cognitive function score in the control group, the standard Alzheimer's care? 0 people did. But then when we're looking at that plant group, we're talking about 10 people improving, which is awesome.
Remember, again, as they were looking at these statistics, the control group was actually started off in a worse place. And Alzheimer's and dementia in general, like the worse you are, the worse you're going to get, right? So if you was still borderline and there was no one in the borderline, or there were less people in the borderline in the control group, if still borderline, you might see some improvement just randomly, but we wouldn't expect improvement in a group that's more weighted towards more severe disease.
And then we can fill in the rest of the chart with different degrees, and we can see all the way down to the people who got moderately worse, 3 of them in the control group and 0 in the plant group. Also twice as many people with minimal worsening in the control group than the plant group. So just this picture here is pretty amazing. If you were to look at...
So it's not amazing for reasons that we're going to get into, because again, it wasn't just a dietary intervention. If you exercise people, if you help people to manage stress, their cognition does improve.
These 2 interventions, whether it's standard care or this plant group and lifestyle, we have a group that you would want your loved one who is facing cognitive decline to be in, and one that you wouldn't want them to be in. That's the key takeaway here. But you may be wondering, if the intervention was so good, why were there even people that had some worsening in that plant group? Well, first of all, we have unique cases and causes of dementia. I mean, maybe somebody's lead levels are just through the charts, and it doesn't matter what diet you put them on, it's still going to be getting worse. But then we also just have overall adherence, and thankfully they looked at this and they did get a pretty clear picture. They say, quote, "We found a statistically significant dose-response correlation between the degree of lifestyle changes in both groups and changes in most measures of cognition and function testing." So the people that did worse were very much less likely to actually adopt that plant-based diet and other...
So he's taking... The lifestyle changes are huge sets of things, as I've alluded to, and he's going to get into later in this video, I think. including exercise, stress management, and so on. So you can't just take one aspect of that. The people who didn't improve also weren't doing their exercise, right? Or who didn't improve as much. So yeah, I think he's taking the lifestyle intervention to only be the vegan diet. When in my opinion, first of all, you can't separate that because all of those things are being measured in one index, which he's alluded to. So you can't say how much of that was exercise, how much of that was diet, et cetera, because we don't have that data. But he's assuming that it's all about plants, and it's really not.
Lifestyle changes than the people that did better. And then we have some other interesting findings. First of all, we have a pretty significant drop in LDL or bad cholesterol in that vegan diet plus lifestyle group over the control group. It's like a
yeah, so what? I mean, we know that people with low cholesterol get heart attacks. We know that people with low cholesterol. In fact, I think according to the data, maybe we'll just look this up. People with lower cholesterol are more likely to suffer from dementia, right? Let's take a quick look. Okay, so let's just take a quick look at this one. Low and high density lipoprotein cholesterol and dementia risk over 17 years of follow-up among members of a large healthcare plan. What this is finding is that so if you have low HDL, which is again low cholesterol, this is considered the good cholesterol. It's not, it's a lipoprotein, it's not even cholesterol. So if you have low or high, that's associated with an elevated risk of dementia. Not that significant if I'm looking at the figures correctly. And there is no association between LDL-C and dementia. So yeah, Mike the vegan is reliable in being wrong. Okay, let's go on.
25% drop. Again, high LDL causally linked to atherosclerosis. So this adds up here completely. And they point to a particular finding that they said might be, the best biomarker change they saw. And that was a beta amyloid blood ratio. This is amyloid beta 42 to 40 ratio. As another study says, low plasma ratio is associated with a high amyloid beta deposition in the brain. And from the Ornish trial, in the intervention group, they saw a 6.4% increase in the right direction in that plant group, and then an 8.3% decrease in that control.
So what? I mean, these are really, even in these studies, it's saying it's an associational connection, and these numbers are pretty meaningless, right? When we're talking about, marginal increases and decreases, like this is not super relevant.
Whole group, not good for them, and highly statistically significant. And like other Ornish studies, he looked at telomeres, which are those caps on the end of your DNA that protect them. In previous studies, he did find that the plant-based and other lifestyle intervention group had a lengthening of telomeres, more protection, previously thought not to be possible as well. But in this case, we're seeing a slight increase, but it just wasn't statistically significant.
The telomere stuff is it's bunkum. Like, it's one of those things that longevity scientists like to talk about, and the evidence behind it is very, very minimal. So this is like, I'm not sure anyone should care about telomeres, but I'm 100% sure no one should care about this level of increase, right? This is not, even in the study, it's not statistically significant.
It wasn't enough. Maybe there weren't enough people. All right, now I'm going to get to my gripe of the study before we get to these amazing anecdotes to match the research. Well, first,
I'm going to guess that he doesn't like the fish oil. That's my guess. Let's see.
First of all, we have the diet itself, which, yes, is described as a whole food vegan diet. There's no animal products being consumed at all, as well as focusing on whole grains, legumes, and cutting out harmful fats and refined carbohydrates, which is great. But this is where I just face-palmed really hard, and that is if you look through their list of supplements, which is quite long, actually. It's like they just threw a lot of stuff that could work at the wall. One of those things is fish oil supplements. I know vegans are like, oh my God, just barely, because we know that you can get the same exact omega-3s from algae. That's where the fish get them.
Maybe, but that's not where the study's been done, right? So if we actually look at the data here, we can find that there is a pretty good study, not that long ago. Okay, April 2020. I remember reading it during lockdown. So fish oil and curcumin supplementation. This is what they ended up using a fish oil and curcumin supplement on cerebrovascular function in older adults, right? So the curcumin, interestingly, didn't do anything, either combined with the fish oil or on its own. But the fish oil did a lot. And fish oil is not just about omega-3s, right? It's got other things in there. So, I mean, I'm glad that they didn't. If they were trying to have a science-based intervention, not that the vegan stuff is science-based, that's also nonsense. But looking at this kind of supplements that actually benefit, I haven't been able to find any studies on the algae oil that he's talking about, whereas the fish oil, there are studies which do demonstrate that fish oil can be effective for reducing cognitive impairment and improving symptoms.
This didn't need to happen. It could have been considered a fully vegan study instead of a vegan diet plus other stuff study. And I was like, why the heck did they do this? I looked.
First of all, it's not just a diet trial, right? He's done other things. He's done meditation. He's done exercise. He's done support, giving people actually. So telling people to exercise is one thing, but having them meet with an actual physiotherapist and so on. I mean, that's a lot of support, right? So thinking that the fish oil is the problem when actually there's a lot of problems here. Again, Mike is pretty dependable in being wrong.
To the funding, and I will say this is funded by a ton of great like nonprofit and charitable organizations, and you got to get money together. But then you can see there a little bit further down in the funding, Nordic Naturals, which of course sells these fish oil supplements. So now the study based around an actual vegan diet, it's thrown in.
Yeah, so what I imagine is, listen, I don't know, because no one has said, Dr. Ornish hasn't published, that part of the story or whatever. So I don't know, but I would imagine what happens with this is they actually design the intervention first, and they say they're going to give people fish oil, and then they contact the companies and say, look, can you maybe provide us some free fish oil? Can you maybe sponsor the project as well? So what he's describing as like, they got the money from Nordic Naturals and then they had to design it that way. I think it's probably the opposite. They probably designed it with fish oil and then they went to the fish oil companies to see who might be willing to give some free fish oil, right?
In fish oil, and is now going to be used likely by certain companies and stuff to sell fish oil for Alzheimer's, which is very disappointing. But I guess you got to get money. There's a lot of money that you need to get for these studies, and if there are authors in the study that aren't necessarily.
So again, I just don't think this guy's been involved in actually doing research, because you would design the intervention first. You would think about how you actually want to do it, and then you would try and get the money, right, from the various parties involved.
Ethically vegan, this is what happens. Anyway, they did quite a.
Ethical veganism is a complete misnomer. There are no ethical vegans. Vegans are some of the least ethical eaters you can imagine. Vegans are not ethical. Let's get that one out of the way.
A few other supplements as well. CoQ10, which is an antioxidant, as well as
this guy.
Lion's Mane.
Does he dye his hair or something? Why is his beard and hair different colors? Does anyone know? If you know, leave a comment below.
In which I have a whole video on that as well. But this brings us to that sort of annoying situation we see with these type of studies where it's like, what actually caused this? Was it the diet? It likely wasn't the exercise. That was like 30 minutes of walking, which we wouldn't see this type of result with. Was it the meditation?
So he's saying it likely wasn't the exercise? Like, I mean, it's let's look at what we're talking about here to understand a little bit better. So the exercise intervention: aerobic at least 30 minutes per day, mild strength training exercises at least 3 times per week from an exercise physiologist in person or with virtual sessions. Patients were given personalized exercise prescription based on age and fitness level. All sessions were overseen by a registered nurse. That sounds like more than just 30 minutes of walking, number one. Number two is, if we actually look at a lot of the trials that exist, I'm just picking out one. This is a meta-analysis. It says physical activity positively affects cognitive performance in older patients. And in the blog post I did, I've linked to another study out of Denmark, which actually shows pretty significant improvement. Now, I'm not showing that in this video because it was more strenuous exercise, but the improvements were similar or maybe even better than what we have in this thing. So to say that, to just poo-poo the physical exercise, again, tells me that he's not interested in actually understanding the science, and he's more interested in promoting his vegan propaganda.
That they also added. No, we don't have studies showing that it could be that.
Meditation, do we have studies showing that meditation can work? Yeah, so there are, favorable but not significant in some of the meditation trials. I think there probably may be more data than just this one. This is a pretty good systematic review from 2019. There might be more research that I'm not aware of that's come out more recently. But again, if someone comes to me with cognitive impairment, one of the first things we're going to do is look into low carb and ketogenic diets, because Alzheimer's is type 3 diabetes, right? But in addition to that, we're going to talk about exercise, because the data on exercise is very clear. Exercise is very good for the brain.
Lion's mane, we've seen some improvements in like one low quality study that I covered in my lion's mane video for cognitive impairment. But, diet, in my opinion, is likely the most powerful factor here.
Yeah, your opinion doesn't count for anything, man. So like I said, the studies on exercise are pretty clear. And the studies also on support. By the way, there's also psychosocial support that's going on in this study as well, right? So if we look, let's talk about that. Participants and their spouses participated in support groups, 1 hour sessions, 3 days per week, supervised by a licensed medical professional, blah, blah, blah. So again, just that support, we would expect some kind of an effect just from having that support group, just from having those sessions, etc. So he wants to read this as being about the diet, and Ornish, in fairness, that's the way he promotes it, but it's really not.
Anyway, let's just hop into some of these cool anecdotes. We have, first of all, this woman who was interviewed by Sanjay Gupta on CNN, and I think it's like
so I think I may actually stop it there. Yeah, I'm not really sure that it's worth talking about the anecdotes and so on. How do we sum this up? Look, there is a new data set. It is Ornish. Ornish has been doing these specific kinds of studies, which include not just diet, but they also include a meditation. They include what he calls lifestyle intervention. So exercise, meditation, supplementation, group support. That's 4 different sets of things, right? And each of those things contain multiple things. If you look at the list of supplements, which Mike showed on the screen for a second, it's not just one supplement, it's several supplements, right? Group support is different things for different people in different circumstances. Some of those people were married, some of them weren't. Group support looks different in those scenarios, right? Even the exercise routine, as I read the paragraph, it's tailored to the individual, right? So treating this as some kind of a data set is very, very difficult. There's a lot of pieces to unpick, right? Now, if someone wants to go on a diet for Alzheimer's, if someone is struggling with mental health and cognition, the first place to go is in a high-fat, high-meat ketogenic diet, right? And there's actually quite a lot of data. Now, this is where I think this guy is full of shit. Actually, let's bring up, there's one other piece of this video that I think it would be worth showing.
But I gotta be fair and show both sides. We have another story of a carnivore dieter, Dr. Bobby D. Cutlets, who also claims to have reversed his Alzheimer's on a carnivore diet. Yes, I reversed my Alzheimer's disease eating pure meat. And where'd my steak go? I seem to have misplaced it. Why is there steak sauce all over my shirt? This keeps happening. And then just a final word on mech.
So this dude is such a wanker. I think that's the word for him. So what he is not saying, and now I have to assume that he knows this because he claims to be interested in Alzheimer's disease. The diet by far that has had the clearest results in terms of leading to cognitive improvements in Alzheimer's and related dementias is the ketogenic diet, right? That could be a purely carnivorous ketogenic diet, although I don't think that's actually been tested. But a diet that's very high in fat has been proven to reverse or at least slow the progression of Alzheimer's disease. So let's just look at one set of data here. So this is called a narrative review on the effects of a ketogenic diet on patients with Alzheimer's disease. By the way, this is 2021. There have been many trials since 2021 because this is the most promising or one of the most promising interventions, right? So what this says is that several types of memory were improved. The ketogenic diet was able to improve cognitive abilities and quality of life of patients ranging from mild to severe. Once ketosis was reached, cognitive improvements were observed in patients ranging from mild to severe or mild to moderate cognitive impairments. Through the use of a ketogenic diet, potential mechanisms can be found to reduce the cognitive decline of patients with Alzheimer's disease and potentially even prevent the damaging effects of cognitive decline from AD altogether. Okay, that's just one narrative review of many possible ones I could cite. But the fact that it's not credible to me that someone who claims to be an expert on Alzheimer's disease does not know that the best dietary interventions are ketogenic dietary interventions. It's just not credible to me. So what does that mean? It means Mike the Vegan is lying. He is giving you this whole video. He's creating a straw man of this vegan Dr. Cutlets or whatever the hell he said. Sorry, not vegan, carnivore Dr. Cutlets, right? So he's creating the straw man of the carnivore Dr. Cutlets or whatever, when we know that actually a carnivore diet with enough fat is actually much closer to the kind of diets that are actually scientifically proven to reduce Alzheimer's symptoms and reverse Alzheimer's disease altogether than whatever it is he's advocating. If someone doesn't know something, that's okay. I can't really blame them for that. I can disagree with them. But if someone knows something and they're deliberately not telling you, then I get a little angry. So you can decide for yourself where Mike is in that on that spectrum. But for me, I think he's bullshitting us. I mean, I think it's just not true. I think he knows that ketogenic diets have been shown to reverse Alzheimer's disease, and he's just not sharing that with his audience, right? Okay, so with that, I'm Samir. I'm a health coach and a PhD student. I'll see you in the next one.